Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Chris Clews, sought after keynote speaker, author, 80s pop culture enthusiast, and he brings timeless lessons from the movies and music of the 80s into today's workplace and life. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks, AJ. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the megaphone. It means a lot to me. I know how difficult it is to produce a podcast. To be a guest is very easy. You just show up. So I appreciate people like you giving people like me a voice.
You're welcome. Welcome to the show, Chris. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll be talking about lessons from 80s pop culture. We'll learn a lot. But before that, let's learn a bit more about you, about your background, about your journey, so that the listeners know who they are listening to.
Sure. So my name is Chris Clews. I'm a keynote speaker and author, as you mentioned. I spent about 20 plus years in corporate marketing, and I loved what I did. But I felt like there was something else out there for me. I just didn't know what it was. And I was in a job that just kind of wasn't working out for me. I think we've all probably been there at some point. And I was having a self-pity party of one on my couch, watching The Breakfast Club, which is on my shirt here, probably had seen it 100 times. And one of the characters, Bender, the criminal or the juvenile delinquent, he says, "Screws fall out all the time. The world's an imperfect place." And I kind of sat up and I thought, my screws have fallen out. I'm in an imperfect place. What am I going to do to fix it? And I thought about it for a while. And then I decided to write this little article on what the Breakfast Club can teach us about problem solving and those screws falling out in your life and in your work. And woke up the next day and a lot of people had read it. They were participating in it, engaging in it. And I thought maybe I had something. So I continued with the job that I had, working full-time there, but every waking minute that I had where I wasn't working, I was building content, published a small book, built a website, positioned myself as a speaker, spent 18 months doing both the job and building up my content. And now for the past 5-6 years, I have been a keynote speaker and author, and I have 3 books, and I do this for a living, and I can't believe it.
You can't believe it. And it's indeed, you have regenerated a lot of things, the culture itself, the 80s itself. But tell me, what is so special about the 80s? We had just a decade back, man had landed on the moon. We still remember the 69, the number, 1969, a lot of places. But what is it special about the 80s that we remember about them, and also the workplaces as well as leadership? Tell us a bit about, that particular time in our lives.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting about the 80s, I say that, and I talk about the pop culture specifically, that the 80s pop culture, I said, was like a glitter bomb. Somebody threw it against the wall, it exploded, and all of these wonderful colors came out. And that was the innovation and the invention and the creativity and all of the wild personalities that were in our pop culture, our musicians and our movie stars and all the music and movies. And so I look at it as this very different decade when it comes to pop culture, like no other decade. If you take a picture of somebody in the 80s, it's clear that it's the 1980s. It can't be mistaken for any other decade. And so I looked at this and I thought, what can we learn from it? What can we learn from these characters in these movies? What can we learn from musicians like Prince? I think all of us know who Prince was, and he has a great lesson that he taught us in leadership that I can share if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Okay. So Prince, for hopefully everybody out there knows Prince, Purple Rain, and all of his great hits. And he was a huge star in the 80s, 90s, and even up to 2016 when he passed away. Now we're going to go back to 1987 for this story. There was another singer named Suzanne Vega, And she was, if you listen to college radio, you would have heard her, but she's she's a great musician. But Prince was the king of music at the time. And he heard one of her songs. And the song is My Name is Luca. And I'm not going to sing it for you, but it's My Name is Luca. I Live on the Second Floor. It's a very serious song about child abuse and child neglect. And Prince heard the song and he was so moved by it that he actually penned a handwritten note to Suzanne Vega. And if you Google Prince, Suzanne Vega handwritten note, you can see the note online. And it said, "Dearest Suzanne, Luca is the most compelling piece of music I've heard in a long time. There are no words to tell you all the things I feel when I hear it. I thank God for you, Prince." And he gave this note to her. You remember in 1987, there was no email or social media. You had to be present. And he was able to share this note with her. And we know about it because in 2016, when he passed away, she shared it with everybody online. And I think he taught us 3 simple lessons with this handwritten note. One is that leaders share the stage of success. So leaders, when they get that stage of success, they share it. They see other people doing great things and they let them know, hey, greatness, I see you doing that thing. There's room on this stage for you as well. Rulers keep everybody below the stage. Once rulers have the stage, they don't want it. They don't want to share it with anybody. They want it all to themselves. Leaders share the stage of success. Number 2 is that the handwritten note is a lost art. That it's so easy to email somebody. It's so easy to, use social media or text someone. But that handwritten note has your heart, your soul, your energy in that writing, in your handwriting. And it's a simple thing to do. And it makes all the difference. People will keep handwritten notes. They keep cards over years. I mean, I know I'm 54 years old. I have a box of important cards and letters and notes that I've received from people. I don't have a box of emails. I don't have a box of text messages, but I have a box of notes that people have given to me. The handwritten note is a lost art. And the third thing is that encouragement doesn't cost a thing. We can all go out and encourage somebody today. And that's what Prince was doing with Suzanne Vega.
Absolutely. Well explained, well said, Chris. Now let's compare it with present leadership level. We are talking about leadership in crisis. We have just the great resignation, quiet quitting on. Amit, so how do you think, what can leaders learn from those lessons of the 80s? Or do you think they won't learn anything because they are living in, the AI times, artificial intelligence that has, lack of empathy, almost empathy is gone. They believe that you don't need employees. Many a time they just think, that we will get, instead of employees, we'll get the bots to do. Perhaps some will, many will not. How do you look at it? All you have worked in corporate, you know about it. How do you look at this part? What is it that they can still learn and find solutions for the problems that they are yet to find for? Because they will not find it with the minds that they have.
That's a great question. And I'm going to go back to the first part that you mentioned, the idea of empathy and empathetic leadership and understanding that the people that you're working with are human beings. Again, we get so accustomed to everything being digital. And so we forget that there's human beings involved in this. And so there was a movie and a book called The Outsiders. And The Outsiders book was written in 1967 by Essie Hinton when she was 16 years old. I can tell you that I was not writing a novel at 16 years old, but she was very talented. And the movie came out in 1983. And it starred a lot of famous actors when they were just getting started. Tom Cruise, Patrick Swayze, Matt Dillon, Ralph Macchio, the Karate Kid, Emilio Estevez, amongst others. And to get to the lesson here about leadership and how I think it can tie to today, there is a moment in the movie where Ralph Macchio's character, Johnny Cade, is dying in the hospital after they've been in a fight with another gang. And Ponyboy, who's played by C. Thomas Howell, is by the bedside with him. And Ponyboy is a really nice, innocent, naive kind of character. Johnny Cade is a tough kid that would join a gang. And Johnny Cade is dying. He whispers to Ponyboy, "Stay gold. Stay gold, Ponyboy." And when he says these 2 words, "stay gold," I extrapolate that out for leaders to say, what stay gold means to me for leadership is to keep your ethical and moral compass intact. regardless of the things that are swirling around you. As a leader, it's very easy to lead when things are going well. True leadership shows up when there are challenges, and usually big challenges. How do you react in those moments? Do you lash out? Is your first instinct to cut staff, to cut budgets, to leave people without a job? Is that your first instinct when something isn't going well? Or is your first instinct to take a step back and look at it from a leadership perspective and say, I'm accountable for this, so I have to take responsibility? As a leader, you're supposed to be the one that takes as they say, the slings and the arrows. You take those. We've all heard the term, heavy is the head that wears the crown. And it's your responsibility. But too often today, leaders don't take responsibility. They don't take accountability. They push it off to other people. They blame other people. And so I think these two words, stay gold, from the outsiders, are so important, that it's so important for leaders to keep that ethical and moral compass intact. Don't forget that as a leader, your team, you may think your team works for you, but you actually work for them.
Absolutely. You actually work for them. Now, in terms of workplaces, you see, instead of workplace is somewhere you would want to go, not every time you want to go, but it is a place where you still can go. But nowadays we have got this new concept of this toxic workplaces, which is not giving you work-life balance, and that is where the Great Resignation and all these things came up against. Now, how do you look at today's workplaces vis-a-vis the workplaces of 1980s? What is the lesson that they can learn from there? If I remember, there were no CCTVs in offices, but there was more trust. Today you have got every nook and corner, filled with CCTV cameras. No trust anywhere, and still people do not want to, nobody listens in that sense. The leader doesn't listen. Maybe the leader complains also that employees don't listen. Where is the trust all gone?
Yeah, I feel, listen, for those of you that are watching and listening, we did not talk before this, but you are asking all the perfect questions that are leading me right into some great lessons. So this one I really love, because you talked about the toxic workplace. And I think a lot of that goes back to stress. And so I use the movie The Karate Kid. Mr. Miyagi, who I love as a character, teaches us so many great lessons. And I think for those of us that love movies and have seen The Karate Kid, most people know when he said, wax on, wax off. But there was something else that he said to Daniel, who was if you haven't seen the movie, this is the kid that he is mentoring, that he's teaching karate to protect himself and also to teach him about life. And he says, don't forget to breathe. Very important. And I use that line to talk about the idea of stress in the workplace, that stress is like dehydration. Once you realize you have it, it's too late. And if you've ever had a bout of dehydration, you know what I'm talking about. You don't know that you're dehydrated until it all comes out. And it's very scary physically and mentally to be dehydrated. Well, stress is the same thing. We're so used to walking around with it. We've become accustomed to carrying stress with us everywhere we go, that we don't realize how stressed we are. And so I say this idea of don't forget to breathe, and I'm really talking to leaders. Leaders, you have got to take time to breathe yourself, because when you get stressed, it rolls down to everybody else on your team, and then they get stressed. And then what happens? It creates that toxic workplace that you were talking about. Everybody's on edge. Everybody's walking on eggshells, as we say. Everybody's very nervous. Everyone's really stressed and tightened up. Nobody knows how to react. And what happens? Your best people are going to leave because they say, I don't want to be in this environment. It's too stressful. Leaders have to take time to breathe. And what I mean by that is take a few minutes to walk your dog, your cat, play with your kids, meditate, yoga, work out, walk, run, have a cup of coffee, cup of tea, whatever it is that you consider breathing, take that break. And I don't mean a break like your paid time off. I don't mean your lunch break. I mean, if you are feeling it in the middle of the day and you need to step back for 30 or 45 minutes or an hour, do it. Reset, re-energize, and come back better and stronger for the people that work with you. And you have to allow your team members that same time to breathe. People that are stressed are not productive, and most importantly, they're not healthy. And we want everybody to be healthy. And of course, we want productive teams. You have to give them that time to breathe. Don't forget to breathe. Very important.
Absolutely. Do not forget to breathe. It's very, very important. Now, one more thing is about, when we talk about workplaces, inclusion and teamwork. People want to be the star themselves, alone, want to do, and then there is the teamwork. Nobody, there is this whole fight about how somebody does not take away the credit that you deserve. Earlier, people were used to give credit, run for giving credit to others. Nowadays, people run away with others that is due to others. What is it that people who are doing like this in workplaces can learn from that part? What is it that they are doing it for? Are they getting what they want out of all these things? What is it that they got in the 80s by giving credit where it was due? How would you like to put it to people today?
Yeah, I would say that, I have a couple of lessons here, but thinking about the 80s and the evolution of movies where we had these big action stars, and I would look at these action stars like the president or CEO or the leader of your company, that they were bigger than life. And they always had to be. In order for us to believe that somebody could save our town or save the world, they had to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. These big, strong, fast humans that were bigger than all of us. But in the 80s, they shifted that. And the heroes in some of these movies looked just like everybody else. They weren't the big, fast, strong, huge Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone guys. They were just a person. And I think there's a really valuable lesson in there. There's a movie called The Lost Boys, which I love. And if you haven't seen it out there, if you like vampire movies, The Lost Boys is the greatest vampire movie of all time. It has Kiefer Sutherland as one of the stars in it. And it's a great, great movie from 1987. But the heroes in the movie, the heroes that save their town from the vampires, are these three kids that two of them work in a comic book store. And one of them is a new kid that moved to town. None of them are big. None of them are strong. None of them are fast. You would never believe that they could save your life, but they do. They save their town. And the lesson here, going back to what you talked about with people in the workplace, is that problem solvers don't come in a one-size-fits-all package. That in our workplace, just because somebody has a title doesn't mean that they have all the answers. In fact, they don't have all the answers. And as somebody with a title, it's important that you include everybody that doesn't. Reach out to people who may not get involved or engaged. Not everybody is going to volunteer to participate. Some people are introverts, some people are extroverts. Make sure you're including everyone, because those answers to the problems and challenges that you're having in the workplace could come from somebody that you did not expect. I always talk about the idea of the best lessons for life and work will come from the most unexpected of places and people. And you have to reach out to those unexpected people to get those answers. So problem solvers don't come in a one-size-fits-all package. Make sure to include everybody.
Absolutely. And talking of inclusion, Chris, is that, I don't know about the 80s, but we had entered the 80s with a lot of baggage of the history. And still, the world was still okay to live in the 80s, especially workplaces. Nowadays, there is so much of discussion about diversity, equity, inclusion that we don't know. But now people are questioning even this very concept, perhaps because the way people have tried to implement it or that. How would you like to put it? Were the 80s more inclusive, or are the 2024s or 25s, this decade is more inclusive? Or if you look at it from that, could the 80s have learned from the future, that is the 2024s, or is it that 2025 can learn from 1980s?
Another great question. And I think the lessons are there in the 80s. We just have to look for them. And they are absolutely there. I'll give you an example. The movie The Goonies, one of the great 80s movies of all time, and a great family movie. Great if you want to introduce your 10, 11, 12-year-old kids to 80s movies. The Goonies is a great way to do it. Has a lot of great actors in it. But there's a storyline within the movie, a lot of storylines. But one of the storylines is when one of the Goonies, which is a group of 7 kids, these little outcasts who are trying to save their town. When you talk about inclusion, all of them are very, very different. They aren't the popular kids, but they band together to try to save their town. And one of them is kidnapped by this family, this Fratelli family. And he's put into the basement with this big human being that looks very different. His name is Sloth. And he's got this cone-shaped head, and he's got eyes that are crooked, and he's missing teeth, and he's huge. He's like a huge, huge person, very scary looking to this kid. And he's been put in the basement because of the way he looks. That's it. Just of the way he looks, his family doesn't want him around. But this kid in the Goonies, he embraces him, and he offers him a candy bar, and they become friends, and he brings him into the group of Goonies. And he teaches us a really valuable lesson, because at the end of the movie, the Goonies actually win at the end, but only because they included Sloth, who everybody else had kept away from the group. They include him in their group, and he helps them win. And it teaches us that, regardless of their cone-shaped heads or ears that wiggle or crooked eyes, to include everybody. That we all win when we include everyone. It's the right thing to do. It's the human thing to do. And from a business perspective, you would be surprised at how quickly your business can move and how fast you can solve challenges when you include everyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everyone wins when everyone is included. In this case, too many cooks do not spoil the broth. That was a different time, different thing. Now, so much to learn from you. Let's learn from your books. The Ultimate Series on Essential Work and Life Lessons from 80s Pop Culture. 3 volumes. Tell us a bit about this series.
Yeah, thank you. So the first one, I've written 3 books in the series. I think that each one is progressively better. If you talk to a lot of authors, they'll always tell you, like I would say, my first book I'm proud of because it set me on this journey. However, it's not the best book. It's this little 60-page book. It's not very deep. The second and third books get much deeper. The first 2 books focus mainly on the workplace culture lessons that we can learn from 80s pop culture. I also weave in with each chapter, if we're talking about a movie that came out in June of 1984, I will talk about that time. You were talking about the history of these years. So I'll talk about what was happening in that time frame, both from a historical perspective and pop culture. What were the movies? What were the books? What was the fashion like? And then what was I doing at that time? Probably something stupid because I was 13 or 14 years old. And so I'll tell a little story about me. And then we get into the lessons from the movies. The first 2 books have 10. The first book, I think, has, each has 10 chapters, 10 different movies. And then the third book is called Raised on the 80s. And that one focuses more on life lessons. It does have some workplace culture lessons, but it focuses on life lessons. The same format, these 10 movies, actually it's 9 movies, and then the musician Prince and the lessons that we can learn from them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one thing I want to know, what have you learned for yourself in terms of the 80s pop culture, Chris?
I think the best lesson there's 2 that I've learned that I think are the best. One I'll go back to, which is with the Breakfast Club. Screws fall out all the time. The world's an imperfect place. And I talk about how in your life and in your work, those screws are going to fall out. The why is important, but it's how you put them back in that really matters. So you want to understand why those screws fall out, but then you want to think about, how do I want to put them back in? Henry David Thoreau, not from the 1980s, maybe from the 1840s, said the mass of men, we'll say today, the mass of people lead lives of quiet desperation. And so you can put those screws back in the same way and keep leading that life of quiet desperation, or you can get a whole new set of screws and a whole new journey and look for something new. So that's one really important one to me, is that the screws are going to fall out. Why is important, but how you put them back in is what really matters. And then the second one is from, again, going back to The Outsiders, but a different line. And this is for all of you out there who are thinking about starting your own thing, doing your own thing, but you're not 25 years old. You're not 30 years old. You're not a young entrepreneur. This is that Johnny Cage said, you still have a lot of time to make yourself be what you want. And That's a really important message for all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, Chris, on this one. Now, one last question I want to understand from you, Chris, is that those were the 80s. And you see, the good part of all these past decades is that they very nicely put all the things together. And like in the relay race, they give that baton to the next runner. In the same way, one decade put all the wisdom, all the good things, not so good things also, put
Yes.
it in the hand of the next decade. Looking at it from 2025, do you think we will have anything that we will be passing on to the next decade, that maybe 2 decades later, 3 decades later, someone from that point in time will think, oh, let's think about the 2020s. Those were the decade, that was the time, that was the culture, that was the thing that we can relate to and think of being in that, learning a lot from that point in time. Can you see anything beyond, from this point in time that we will be passing on to the next decade and next, and to humanity itself?
Yes. I think the one word I think of when I think of the 2020s and now in 2025 is resilience. The world is very resilient, and we've shown that. We had a very interesting time back in 2020 with COVID, and there were a lot of unknowns. It was scary for a lot of people. It was the whole world had the problem. So often in life, we see that one country is having a problem or one area is having a problem. We have right now the wildfires that are happening in California and Los Angeles that are terrible. And that's one area of the world that is being impacted right now. In 2020 with COVID, the entire world was impacted. And here we are back again, standing up on our 2 feet, doing our thing, you and I talking from different countries on this podcast. And I would say that if they learn anything in the next 2 or 3 decades, they look back, it's resilience.
Absolutely. There is so much to learn from the 80s through you. There is so much to learn from you directly, Chris. And I'm sure a lot of people would want to connect with you, learn from you, learn about you, learn from you about the 80s, learn from your books. What's the best way for them to connect with you, Chris?
Thanks. The best way to connect with me would be through my website, chrisclews.com, CHRISCLEWS.com. You can find all of my information there, my videos, who I'm speaking to, what I'm doing, my content. And if you're curious a little bit more about me as well. And then I'm on most of the socials. Instagram is at Chris Clews 80s. Twitter X, I'm at 80s Pop Culture. And then you can find me, Chris Clews, on LinkedIn, Facebook, and also on YouTube.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, AJ. Stay rad, everybody.